Welcome to the New York Knicks midseason report here on WFUV Sports. Recording this over the All-Star break, I'm Ben Oppenheimer, your New York Knicks beat reporter for the 2024 to 2025 NBA season, alongside my fellow Knicks beat reporter, Owen Kelty. Owen, it's great to be with you here. Always love to talk Knicks, especially with you. Great minds think alike. And the Knicks find themselves in, on paper, what is a really strong position. They're 36-18. It's their best start in 28 years. They're averaging 118 points per game. They're third in field goal percentage at 49%, fifth in three-point shooting percentage at 37%, shooting pretty well from the charity stripe at 80%, 10th in assists at 27 a game, third in turnovers, only 13 a game, and fifth in net rating, plus 5.9. And Jalen Brunson, and Karl-Anthony Towns, the first Knicks all-star starters since 1975. So that duo of them together has been certainly potent on the offensive end. But it almost feels like something is amiss here. And we talked about before we went on recording this that, best start in 28 years. That's great. Knicks fans, this organization, the front office has absolutely a reason to feel excited about that. But then you look deeper into what has been a part of this schedule so far. Is for as good as the Knicks' first half record was, they weren't that good against winning teams. They were 24-6 against teams with losing records, but just 12-12 against teams with marks of 500 or better. Now, again, you can say they haven't had Mitchell Robinson all season. He's been cleared, you just told me, so he's going to be coming back, returning with this team on the court, I assume, very soon. But Robinson has been out. OG Anunoby, who's a huge factor to this team, has been out since early this month and using the All-Star break to kind of take some time to get healthy. What I'm trying to say is this team has a really solid record competing in the conference, but you're wondering, is it a mirage? Is it, what is the real story here in terms of how good is this team actually?
I mean, you can look at, I think they're still a really good team, but you make good points. I mean, they had that 9-game winning streak, but if you look at the teams they're playing that 9 games, it was a lot of below 500 teams. And then that right after there was that stretch where I think it was like Thunder, 2 other really good teams in the Thunder again, and I think they went 1-3 in that stretch, ended up losing 5 of 7 at one point against really good teams. And you look at the regular season, it's going to be a lot of ups and downs. You win 9 in a row, you're due to have a bad stretch. But it makes sense what you're saying. Like, it feels like something's missing. They're the third best team in the East, which when you look at the teams, like there's no argument, I don't think, that they are better than the Celtics or Cavs. Maybe the Cavs, you can say they have an advantage over them in the playoffs if Mitchell Robinson's healthy, but like they are the third best team in the East, and that's like what their record is, and I think that's accurate to say. Like, they're better than every other team in the East, better than the Pacers, who are in 4th in the East right now, but something is missing, and I don't know how much you can rely on Mitchell Robinson going forward.
Do you think that's what's missing?
I think
Mitchell
like
Robinson?
Definitely his defensive presence. Right now, the Knicks are 20th in defensive rating, which for a Tibbs team is a shocker. I mean, every year, I think since he's been coaching the Knicks, they've been top 10 in defensive rating, but also their second offensive rating. So there's that like give and take there. I do think Mitchell Robinson offers something different with the rotation. You can, against teams like the Cavs, I think you do start him next to Cat and put Josh Hart on the bench. But against maybe a smaller team, you have Mitch coming off the bench, and he offers much more of a traditional center, because Cat's obviously not your traditional center. He's been rebounding, best rebounding year of his career. He's averaging 13.4 rebounds a game this season, but he offers that like traditional center that you don't have. Like Precious Achiuwa has been really, I think, good for them, but not really on the offensive glass. And Mitchell Robinson, everyone knows, is one of the best, if not the best, offensive rebounder in the game. And then backup center-wise, Jericho Sims gets traded, but overall he was only really a good rim protector, but he really couldn't do much else. And then Ariel Hukporti has shown signs, but they're missing that traditional center, and I think Mitchell Robinson will help that. You brought up, too, OG Anunoby has been out, I believe now, it's been almost 3 weeks at this point. That's been a big loss these last couple of weeks, but I think the whole aspect of this team is just they have to get in healthy. And right now I'm concerned about that because Cat's banged up. Josh Hart has been banged up this season. OG, and then Brunson's had his up and downs with injuries back and forth. But so far, looking at the first, I guess, half of the season pre-All-Star break, I think you can be happy with it. But this being the first season in 20-something years with real expectations, that's why I think it feels so much worse than it actually is.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of obviously it's great, but there were expectations to start that this team would be second to Boston. This roster was constructed, which I wanted to touch upon. This roster was constructed to be the Boston beater.
Mm-hmm. And they've gotten killed twice by Boston.
Yeah, I think if you're Leon Rose, if you're part of the front office, if you're Tom Thibodeau, there's reason for concern when every time you've played Boston, opening night in Boston, I was there covering the game with WFUV Sports. Absolute blowout. Absolute
The game
blowout.
was over in the first quarter.
Yeah. And when I was covering that game, I just thought in my head, Boston is not going away anytime soon.
No.
And they're almost like, it's funny because my mom made this comparison. She said, it's almost like watching the Warriors again. But in some ways, it's scarier because the Warriors, now, again, this is subjective, but the Warriors played with like a free, kind of happy, laid-back style.
And it's also Steph Curry, Kevin Durant, and Klay Thompson.
Right.
This is you're getting beat by Derek White or Peyton Pritchard dropping 20 on you. It's such a different.
Exactly.
It's the same idea, like a super team in the league that's just dominating, but like that Warriors team was just 3 or 4. Draymond was still really good at the time. Superstars. This Celtics team's so deep.
Yeah, you can almost say this Boston team is more organic than the Warriors because the Warriors, obviously with Kevin Durant came through free agency, and Boston, they just made all the right moves since 2018 when they traded. They got rid of Isaiah Thomas, and then they kind of built up from there. They drafted Tatum and Brown, and they've stuck with that core ever since. And it's really obviously worked out for them. And I just, you may say it's like beating a dead horse here, but I don't see, even when healthy, I don't see how the Knicks can really compete with the Celtics right now because, I'm thinking February 8th, that was when our very own Chaz McAdams, who is also one of our Knicks beat reporters, he was not able, unfortunately, to
on the road trip with the Fordham men's basketball team right now.
Yes. So Chaz is over in Western Pennsylvania in Pittsburgh for the Duquesne game, I believe. So Chaz, I'm sure, would love to be with us and talk some Knicks versus Celtics, him being a Celtics fan. But I think it really humbled this New York team when the Celtics just dominated them again, 131-104, this time at home. And, obviously you can say no OG. That's a huge factor.
When guarding Tatum, too.
Right.
Tatum, I think, at 40-something.
Right. But then you go back to opening night. Everyone was healthy. The whole starting lineup was there. But then you can also say if you're arguing from the Knicks standpoint, that was a different team that had not fully
only
gelled.
played like 3 preseason games together at that point.
Yeah. But I really do think that as currently constructed, this Knicks team is not going to beat Boston. I think if they were to face Boston in the playoffs, I think really what I've seen in these 2 games that they played, Brunson and Cat really have a hard time on the defensive end.
Especially against a team that has, at most points, if Porzingis is healthy, 5 scorers on the floor. You can't hide both of them.
Yeah.
Like in last year's team, you could kind of hide Brunson behind some guys. Especially, that's what I think Mitch offers against the Celtics, which would be interesting. I mean, Porzingis is a stretch 5, so Mitch has struggled with stretch 5s, but I think that offers something where you don't have to hide Cat as much because Cat is going to get hit. Like they're going to go to the rim, and Cat is not a great rim protector. He can kind of hold his own on the perimeter against a guy like Porzingis, but that's where a lineup, I think, with Mitch and Cat in it could work, but then you're losing Josh Hart's defense. So I think, like, if you came to a playoff series against the Celtics, they'd have to get, I think, a little interesting with the lineups. Maybe keep the starting lineup the same, but most of the game run maybe don't have as much Jalen and Cat on the floor at the same time, stagger them, have Deuce at point guard when Cat's at center, have that defense there, and maybe stagger them until the closing last minutes when you just need points. But something's got to change, and I mean, realistically, when you look at the Knicks and then you look at the Celtics, the ceiling is still, I think, is the Eastern Conference Finals. I don't, my personal opinion, I don't see any team beating the Celtics 4 times in the East or the West because of the way they shoot the three. Like, they shoot in really good numbers from 3 every single night, and they don't have 4 bad games in a row. Or, like, I don't see them having 4 bad shooting nights in a 7-game series. I just, like, realistically, I think they'll go back-to-back, and I do think the Knicks are better than the Cavs when it comes to the playoffs. I think they match up well against them, especially with how certain guys on the Cavs have performed in the playoffs, and they haven't really proven themselves, where Brunson has proven himself, and a couple other guys in the Knicks have. So I still give them the upper hand on the Cavs, who got off to that insane start, which is, I mean, they're still 44-10. Which is,
I want to touch upon briefly what you just said about Cleveland is nobody expected they would be this good.
17-0 to start the year, right?
Yeah,
or 17-1.
17-1, I believe. But at the same time, there was a period last season where I believe they won 19 out of 21 games. And
I think it was like to end the year or something like that.
Yeah, and everyone was saying, and the Knicks were, at that time, especially with how banged up they were last season, they were really competing with Cleveland for what position they would be in to go into the playoffs. But I am so, and I'm sorry to any Cleveland fans who happen to be watching this, I am so unconvinced by this Cavs team.
Same.
Because every time they have gone into the playoffs with some expectation, some hype, some fear that they're really going to show that potent offense that they've shown not just this season but in previous years, they just wither away in the spotlight. You saw in 2023 in round 1 versus the Knicks. The Knicks beat them in a gentleman's sweep in a 5-game
pretty much
series.
Not dominated that series on the boards too. Like those Evan Mobley and Jared Allen could not compete with Mitchell Robinson.
Yeah,
and that was I think that's what always will give the Knicks the upper hand against the Cavs. They're rebounding, they can't hang with Mitchell Robinson. And even if you look at the Cavs last year, they went to 7 with that Magic team that was so banged up. Magic were like losing players left and right, and it still took the Cavs to 7. Cavs also lost a lot of players last year, but not a lot of guys besides Donovan Mitchell have stepped up in the playoffs on that team.
Yeah. And so I think almost the Knicks have their number in a sense. I know it's not exactly the most analytical or nuanced take, but I really do believe that. And if you call back to, there was a game last season, around this time last season, where it was Knicks in Cleveland and Brunson leaves the game in the first quarter. Because I forget what it was.
Everyone thought he tore his ACL or Achilles.
Yes.
And it was like, oh man, it's over.
And luckily Brunson ends up perfectly fine. Just a minor injury. And Josh Hart hits the game-winning shot.
Do you remember that?
And then yanks the chain.
Someone's. I think it was Donovan Mitchell not playing that game, or he grabbed someone's chain on the sideline.
Yeah. And I just watched that. And I'm like, the Knicks have the Cavs number, man. So, but again, obviously, this could be the year in the playoffs that the Cavs prove everyone wrong. But for me, if you talk about the definition of a regular season team, it almost seems like Cleveland is fit for that description. So, I think the Cavs, it totally remains to be seen, but I'm unconvinced, but the Celtics are almost the wall.
They're the team that you got to somehow, someone's got to, hopefully, it'd be a miracle. But if the Knicks do make they're gonna make the playoffs. But if the Knicks move on into the playoffs, you have to hope someone else beats the Celtics.
Yeah.
And looking at the standings right now, if they stayed the same, it'd be Celtics 2, so they'd be playing the Magic in round 1, which is, not. It'd be looking at it right now. If it stayed the same, it'd be Knicks Pistons round 1, which I think would be a lot of fun between the Garden and then going back to Little Caesars now, Little Caesars
Yes.
Arena. Those Pistons fans haven't had playoffs in a long time since I think that was the first Blake Griffin year.
Yeah.
So that'd be a really fun series. But I'd rather play a different team than the Pistons because I think there'll be a fight in the playoffs. But Knicks looking like they're going to stay in that 3 seed, Celtics 2 seed. So that's what I also find interesting about these last 30 games or so. You're kind of solidified into that 3 seed. At what point do you stop counting? Like you start just doing rest days here and there to get ready to go into the playoffs. I mean, what do you think about that? I mean, you're 2.5 behind the Celtics, but if you lose, you play them again. I believe it's next week. You lose to them again, you're not really coming back to beat them. If you're in that spot, I think at some point you got to start giving rest days here and there to guys.
Yeah, I mean that would be the prevailing wisdom around it, especially these days with load management.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll tell you what, Tom Thibodeau does not see things that way, and even during last season, in the final stretch of the regular season, the media would ask Tom Thibodeau, they'd say, are you going to give Brunson a day off? Even if it were to sacrifice a win that would help advance to the 2nd seed or the 3rd seed, wherever they were, because they were really competing
between 1 and 2.
Yeah,
or 2 and 3 seed, but by 1 game.
Yeah,
it came to that last game of the season.
Yeah,
against the Bulls, and the Bucks threw their game because they didn't want to be the 2 seed. But.
Yeah, and so I think that would be a good idea, especially the rest up for the playoffs. But that's not something I think Tom Thibodeau believes in. It's very old school, and I like that. I really do like that. I think. I call back to that report from, I believe it was The Athletic, who said Tom Thibodeau is the coach that NBA players least want to play for. And then meanwhile, all of the Knicks
love playing for him.
Yeah, love playing
for
him.
They did a good job, this front office, finding Tibbs guys, which was a big question going in the Cat trade.
Yeah.
But
I think
they had their issues in Minnesota, when Cat was a young player, but I think it's you're seeing a very different Karl Anthony Towns this year. That I think, especially on the boards, like he had his career year with Tibbs in Minnesota. And now he's having one of the best years of his career again with Tibbs. And I think that narrative around Tibbs being a guy that kills his players changed, but he'll never get rid of the minutes. The minutes, they're gonna play a lot of minutes, but the whole idea that he runs them crazy in practice and they hate playing for him, I think, has changed these last couple of years.
Yeah, I think it's kind of almost like a cheap shot, a generic criticism of Tom Thibodeau is that, he injures his players, can't win a championship with him because he's going to run his whole starting lineup into the ground, which, I don't think is true. And again, the injuries that happened last year were freak injuries.
Mm-hmm.
Like, obviously, Julius Randle no longer with the Knicks organization, but
got undercut.
When he was playing in that game versus the Heat last January 2024, that was a freak freak injury in terms of how that happened. And so you can't blame Tom Thibodeau for every single injury that happens. It's ridiculous. But I want to talk about what you said earlier about you can't hide Brunson and Cat. You can't hide both of them. And, I've really been thinking about this as one, and there's nothing the organization can really do about it, but in the games that they've lost this season, I've noticed how different in a negative way this team is without Isaiah Hartenstein and his presence on the floor, especially the change on the defensive end. For a team that was supposedly coming back with the stifling defense that we saw at many points during last year's season. This unit for the Knicks ranks 18th in defensive rating in the NBA, and most notably, dead last in opponents' three-point shooting percentage. And I've noticed that watching games,
it's fun the Celtics
covering
destroy
games,
them
yes,
almost
because
every single time because they shoot so many threes and we're the worst 3-point defensive team in the league.
Yeah, and I find that no one is so many times, not just the Celtics, but against numerous teams, opponents are just left wide open from beyond the arc, and no one is coming to help. And it almost sometimes it feels like they're just resigning themselves that, he's going to shoot the three. Maybe he'll make it. Maybe he won't. And then they just hope to get the rebound. And that you can see that just watching as a casual fan, not just as a reporter covering, just watching these games, that they're giving up a lot of threes. They're also last in block shots per game.
That's not that much that's not shocking really to me because we knew going to the season that Cat wasn't going to be a big rim protector.
Yeah.
And if you look at the two guys they've had the last 2 years, Mitchell Robinson and Isaiah Hartenstein were two elite big men at protecting the rim. I do think that will change once Mitch comes back. They'll get better at defense around the rim because, Cat he's like a power forward center hybrid kind of guy. Like
he's not a pure center.
No, and he's not a bit like super like athletic bouncy guy like a Mitchell Robinson or as strong as Isaiah Hartenstein. So that is disheartening that they're not defending the three or not defending the rim. But that's why they're 20th right now in defensive rating and they're such a high powered offense because they have guys like Cat and Brunson. But I do think the loss of Isaiah Hartenstein was a lot bigger than. Everyone thought it was going to be a big loss, but I think it's had a lot bigger of an impact this year, especially with not having Mitchell Robinson. And I do think they might have thought Mitchell Robinson might have come back earlier.
Yeah, that was definitely the expectation. Some people thought it would come back in, December, and then it was extended and it went on. But now it looks like there's light at the end of the tunnel for those who are awaiting Mitchell Robinson's comeback.
Still feels like March 1st or like a little after. I don't think he's within the next couple games.
Yeah, no, I agree. March 1st. But one thing I want to touch on before we start to wrap this thing up is Chris Persianen, who is former New York Knicks beat reporter from last year and the year before that, former WFUV alum, Fordham alum, great guy, incredibly knowledgeable about the game of basketball and the Knicks in general. He had a tweet, I believe it was a week or so ago, or it might have been 2 weeks ago, where it may have been either a link to an article or was a video. I forget which it was, but I took a look at it. And the point he was basically making was that the Knicks they're not in a rush to be contending right now in terms of.
I've seen that a lot from a lot of different.
And I'm just saying my opinion. I strongly disagree with that.
I agree with it.
This team, this whole starting lineup is in their late 20s or approaching their late 20s. Some are approaching the age of 30, especially Cat. And once you hit the age of 30, again, there's been exceptions, especially in the past 2 years with how much better medicine and taking care of your body has gotten in the NBA in terms of getting that longevity. But it's a sense of, there should be a sense of urgency when you're contending. And, I don't sense that sometimes, especially at the trade deadline. But there's also a limit to what they could have done at the trade deadline.
They're heavily against that second apron, which you really don't want to go over because you start losing the draft picks.
Right.
But the only thing I think they view this as like a 4 to 5 year window. And like, if you look at, this is year one, they kind of went all in on getting rid of their picks this year. But if you look at a team like it takes years to get that depth. Like, look at a team like the Nuggets a couple years ago. They had all those guys, but that depth was so important. But then when you kind of dump all your picks out, it's going to take a couple years to build up your depth again. And because it's going to have to be through not like vet minimum guys, smaller contract guys with the trade exceptions and stuff, like this first year was, I think, a test run to see you got your stars, you got your role players, you got Josh Hart, OG, Mikal, and then this is the year they're looking at. All right, what do we need to add in this offseason and then next year to make this team a full team? Because we looked going into the season was always the depth wasn't great. Like Landry Shamet, hustle guy, good. I think he's a good player, but not depth on a like he's not in an 8-man rotation on a championship team. And as of right now, he is borderline on the 8th man on this roster. So I think they wanted to use this season to see what else they need to add to become a championship team. And whatever happens this year is just on top of that good. Because this is only the first year. I do think this team will be a contender for 3, 4, maybe 5 more years. But I get what you're saying. They are kind of up there in age. But they're still all, like Brunson is getting better every year still. He kind of is hitting us prime later. Cat's Cat. I mean, I think you can rely on him for a couple more years. And then Mikal and OG have been, I mean, I think OG Anunoby too is kind of slowly getting better and better every year.
Yeah.
So I don't look at this as a 1-year thing.
Yeah, I think that's a very nuanced take and some great points. It's just the question of, can these guys stay healthy for the next 1, 2, 3,
and it
4
also,
years?
I mean, realistically, it depends on do the Celtics keep their core together? Because as long as if they're able to keep these like 7 players together, it'll be hard to see anyone. I wouldn't be shocked if they three-peated, end up winning this year and next year, and then eventually I think after next season they do get hit hard by cap space. So that's really the reality of the NBA today. This like you can't compete forever. You have 3 years to 5 years of being able to skirt around that second apron, and then it's like now you got to blow it up or you got to like trade a superstar. And I think the Celtics are going to reach that probably after next season. So that might be your window they're looking at is after next season to try to get in there.
We shall see. But before we wrap this thing up, quick rapid fire question. Favorite game that you've covered so far this season and why?
Favorite game that I've covered this season? It was either early in the season, the Brunson game winner versus the Brooklyn Nets, or last week, the Atlanta Hawks were visiting, 149-148 Knicks. I don't think I've ever seen either team ready for the All-Star break more. No defense was played. Knicks blew that lead so many times. Game goes to overtime. Longest NBA game I've ever been to. The game ended at 10:45 at night, which was, for any NBA game, that feels late. But that was just an incredible back-and-forth game. Cat had 40, Brunson 36, Trae Young had 39 and 19. Overall, it's a really good game, and Brunson hits the game winner. Mikal blocks Trae Young. And then, shockingly, bang, bang, Georges Niang misses the game winner, which you never see. Georges Niang, I feel like, kills the Knicks every single time. So that was just overall fun game to be at. And that many points scored in a single overtime game was just incredible.
Yeah, I would say mine, just quickly, is I had the privilege of covering the Christmas Day Knicks-Spurs game. And, covering that, I thought with how unique and dominant that Wemby is on the floor, I just thought, the Spurs are going to wrap this thing up, and it's going to because Wemby looks unguardable. But then the Knicks went on a run in the third and into the fourth, thanks to Mikal Bridges.
44.
40, or I think it was, 41
okay.
points. Still in the 40s. A sensational performance from him. Brunson had an off night. Towns had a relatively off game as well. So it was Mikal Bridges who saved the day in that one, and it was definitely memorable. And that crowd, especially for a Christmas Day game, it felt like a playoff atmosphere, which is great. What makes the Garden, so special, as you know. And I'm sure we'll be covering some more thrilling games and
some playoff games. Hopefully deep into the playoffs this year.
Yes, and we shall see. But I think that'll just about wrap things up for this New York Knicks mid-season report here on WFUV Sports. I'm Ben Oppenheimer, your New York Knicks beat reporter for this year, alongside my partner Owen Kelty. Signing off for right now, but stay tuned to our social media feeds on X for some Knicks coverage all season long. Once again, that was your Knicks mid-season report here on WFUV Sports.